Hey monsters! Thanks for tuning in to Murder Murder News, the true crime cult for the latest breaking news, murdery memes, TV reviews, podcast recommendations, and all things spooky. If you like talking about true crime and playing with baby goats, this just might be the cult for you. I'm television's Aurora Katie.
And I'm Angelina. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And this is the Week in True Crime.
Murder, murder, news.
On March 13th, Breonna Taylor, an emergency medical technician, was murdered in her own bed by the police. While Breonna's case isn't new, we wanted to touch on it today because no charges have been filed against the officers at this time, though the FBI has reopened her case as of May 21st. So as of today, no arrests have been made for Breonna's known killers 4 months after her murder. Breonna was at home in bed in Louisville, Kentucky, when police officers entered her apartment using a battering ram while executing a no-knock warrant to search for drugs on the property. Not only were there no drugs at Breonna's apartment, but the police were in fact searching the wrong apartment. She died after being shot 8 times while in her bed sleeping. Breonna's 27th birthday would have been last Friday. So what can you do to help get justice for Breonna? You can sign the petition attached below, demanding that charges be brought against the officers that killed her. The petition will also attempt to have damages paid for Breonna's family and to have Congress intervene to revoke the no-knock warrant, which was used to enter Breonna's home. We have also included a link to her GoFundMe below.
We also wanted to revisit another older case that needs some attention. 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was found dead in his high school gym in Georgia on January 11, 2013. Kendrick was found in an upside-down, rolled gym mat under pretty suspicious circumstances. There was a pool of blood on the ground next to the mat, and his shoe was next to the pool of blood. The blood next to the mat did not belong to Kendrick. Now, we aren't going to display any photos of the crime scene, but the mat appears to have been wrapped quite tightly around Kendrick, and it seems pretty hard to believe there's any way he could have crawled inside himself. Nonetheless, the investigation into Kendrick's death was ruled accidental, and the coroner said he died of positional asphyxia. Needless to say, Kendrick's family did not accept the death as accidental and paid to have a second autopsy, which revealed that his organs had been removed and stuffed with newspapers. It was also revealed that he had suffered hemorrhaging on the right side of his neck, which meant that he had likely died from blunt force trauma. Kendrick's death is incredibly suspicious, and his family deserves answers. We are attaching a petition below for the Supreme Court to reopen Kendrick's case, so please sign it to help get justice for his family.
Remember the Lori Vallow case we last mentioned back in March? Lori and doomsday prophecy writer Chad Daybell were married in November, just 2 weeks after Chad's wife Tammy's untimely death. The newlywed couple became the subjects of police scrutiny after they mysteriously fled to Hawaii with no sign of Lori's 2 children, 7-year-old JJ Vallow and 17-year-old Tylee Ryan, who had last been seen in September. Now, with Lori and Chad both in jail, police have conducted a second large-scale search of Daybell's property, discovering human remains. Police have not yet confirmed, but family members have released statements that the bodies found were in fact those of the children. Chad Daybell now faces new charges of concealing evidence, but there are still no murder charges on the table, and we have so many questions. Why are the children's bodies simply being referred to as evidence? Why was no evidence found in the first police search of the property? And what about all the other mysterious deaths in the wake of this doomsday couple, including Chad's wife, Lori's estranged husband, and her brother? I'm sure we haven't heard the last of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, who are preparing for the second coming of Christ just next month in July 2020. This week, we're watching 13th on Netflix. 13th explores the intersection of race, justice, and mass incarceration in the United States. It's named after the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the U.S. Yet when slavery ended, a new system of oppression aimed at people of color began through criminalizing behavior largely associated with drug use, leading to forced labor and essentially back to slavery. The documentary is incredibly powerful and touches on the need to decriminalize drug possession and use in the U.S.
Each week, we'll try to introduce you to a podcast that might be new to you. This week's favorite podcast is True Crime Witch. Let's take a look. We are so excited to have Emma with us from this week's favorite podcast, True Crime Witch. Emma takes you into the world of everything murderous, mysterious, and downright macabre. Emma, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. How are you doing, Aurora?
I am so good, or at least hanging in there.
Yeah.
So you're in Manchester, and I was wondering how the quarantine is going there. Like, what state are you in? Is anything reopening yet?
I think we're in a proposed phase 2. I mean, I work at a hospital, so nothing has really changed for me during quarantine. It's just been a bit quieter, but we are starting to see things slowly opening back up. So sports coming back, schools are thinking about reopening, some businesses are thinking about reopening, and offices are looking at going back, but no one really knows. It's a whole lot of uncertainty. Everyone's sort of just up in the air. No one knows what to do.
Yeah, it's, and thank you for what you do, first of all, working in a hospital. That's so amazing. Thank you so much. But yeah, things are, like, it seems like the world is kind of slowly coming back to life and getting a little less scary. So Emma, your podcast is so fantastic. I love, first of all, for an American, ever hearing a British accent is like peak for us. Like, I could just listen to you talk about anything. It doesn't have to be murder, though I'm excited that that's what you chose. But your podcast is fantastic. What inspired you to start it?
So I have a background in forensic science and criminology. In 2017, I finished my degree, and I was sort of like, what's next? What's next for me? I got a job as a lab technician, sort of did that for a year or two, decided I wanted something different, but I wanted to start the podcast to keep that side of me alive, to keep everything that I've learned and everything that I can still learn from true crime, just keep it going.
And so when you worked in criminology, this is so fascinating to me because it's something that I never thought to do when I was in school. Like, I didn't even know that that was an option. You said you worked in a lab. Like, what was that like? Like, I know that when I think of it, it sounds like this glamorous CSI thing, like you're out on crime scenes and whatever.
Yeah.
What's the reality?
The reality is it's a lot of working alone. Like, I was the only lab technician at the company where I worked, so I was working on my own most of the time. I was sort of in a room that had one window with this giant metal shutter. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of frustration. You put 7 hours of effort into sample preparation. You come to it the next morning, nothing's worked. You've got to do it all again. So it's definitely not as glamorous as everyone thinks it is. It's very frustrating at times.
So what's your true crime origin? What got you into true crime originally?
Well, between the ages of about 5 or 6, I heard a family friend that someone they knew was doing a forensic science degree and they were working with the police. So my young brain was like, wow, that sounds amazing and glamorous. So sort of ever since then, I was into crime, really. And living in the UK, we do have quite a lot of high profile cases. So I think that heightened my awareness to what was going on around me.
Very cool. And is there a case, a specific case that's always stuck with you and haunted you that kind of keeps you up at night?
Jessica Wells and Holly Chapman. So they were two 10-year-old girls who were killed by their caretaker. I guess you'd call it a school janitor in the US. They were killed by a man called Ian Huntley, who is currently in prison and has coronavirus. So I can't say I have much sympathy for him there.
None at all.
No. But
yeah, so that's a new case for me. Can you describe it a little bit?
So he ended up luring them into his house because he knew them and he was in a position of power and trust with those girls. And they thought, it's a school caretaker, we can go into his house. And he ended up murdering them and dismembering them in his bath, I believe. And then he dumped them in what I believe the US call a ravine. It was like a river, muddy area. And it was just horrible. It was just horrible. As I was only 6 at the time, but I think growing up through that, I realised what the world is actually like, and like, there's not every adult that you can trust. It was really messed up, and it's kind of heartbreaking now to think that two 10-year-olds, it's horrible.
Yeah, I feel like so many of us, our origin, like how we got into true crime, was probably hearing about the big murder that happened, when we were young, like between the ages of like 5 and 10 maybe, and realizing that the world out there isn't that safe, like your parents. And like, especially when I grew up like in the 80s, and I know things are a bit different, we had so much freedom to go. I could just like go ride my bike all day and not check in with my parents from like morning until dinner time. And now, like, we know that there's a lot of bad people out there, and parents try to keep their kids a little bit closer. But like all the time, like I remember one time I was playing in my woods as a kid behind my house, and there was a homeless man who had set up back behind, like we had like acres of woods behind our house. And my sisters and I kind of like came across his camp. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that he would have done anything to kids. Like he could have just fallen in hard times, like who knows? But like we saw all this stuff and like just got out of there. We're like, oh my God, it's happening. It's all the things we hear on the news and on TV. Like we're going to be murdered now. There's a murder in our backyard. Like we were so terrified.
Yeah, no, my parents have never let me in the woods. That was no.
It's all we did. It's amazing I have lived to tell this tale. So out of all of the wonderful cases you've covered on your podcast, do you have a favorite that really stands out to you?
The West Dalton Jane Doe, mainly because I have submitted some tips to her possible identity, and she's possibly linked to another Jane Doe. So I actually spoke to the Doe Project, the DNA Doe Project, NamUs, and the medical examiner this weekend. So they have that tip. So hopefully this goes forward. But it's just one of those cases where you get into researching, and the more you unravel, the deeper you dig into that rabbit hole, the more it sticks with you. You just can't let that case go.
Right.
And right. I want to see it so bad.
Well, that's incredible that you have a personal connection to the case. Do you mind going into a little bit of detail of how you think you might have recognized this person?
So Jane Doe, West Dalton Jane Doe, was found in February 1968. She was found in a suitcase in a river. So she was between 2 and 4 years old, but we're guessing about 2 years old, which is heartbreaking. So alongside West Dalton Jane Doe being found, in I believe it's the Mississippi River, which is just sort of down that way, there was another Jane Doe found. Now she is an adult, and she was also found in 1968. Now she may have possible indications that she has given birth at least once in her life, and she was sort of disposed of in a similar circumstance to West Dalton Jane Doe. So I think it would be a bit of a coincidence that 2 Jane Does in the proximity of a super close area are disposed of in a similar sort of way.
Wow.
And that relation.
Wow, that's incredible that you put that together. I'm so impressed.
Thank you.
Well, Emma, it has been such a pleasure having you today. Can you let our viewers know where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Twitter if you just search for True Crime Witch. I am on Instagram, just at True Crime Witch Podcast. I have a Facebook page, which is just the True Crime Witch Podcast, and also a discussion group, which is just called Spooky Gang, the True Crime Witch Podcast discussion page. I'm on YouTube and every good podcast platform. On that podcast platform, then it ain't so great.
I love it. Well, don't forget to subscribe to the Spooky Gang on wherever you subscribe to podcasts, True Crime Witch, and thank you so much for joining us, Emma.
Thank you so much for having me.
This week on MURDERMURDER.NEWS, we chatted with Murderino maker Holly of Side Hustle Vinyl. Holly decided to start her custom vinyl business after discovering her love of bright colors and straight lines in design. Already a fan of true crime, her 2 interests of vinyl and podcast slogans go hand in hand. Be sure to check out her super adorable decals in the link below. We love reading your comments and feedback, and we wanted to thank Love Always Nay for mentioning that the external resources we provided help to support those who want to protest.
We also want to thank My World Is Your Oyster for commenting that George Floyd's murder disgusts her. She's from Minneapolis and doesn't understand why brutality from the police is ongoing.
Thanks so much for tuning into This Week in True Crime with Murder Murder News. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button below, give us a thumbs up, and tell all of your true crime friends.
If you need more of a true crime fix, join our commune at MURDERMURDER.NEWS for our Monster Book Club and cold case solving groups. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. See you next week.
Murder, murder, news.